KPMG in India and CNBC-TV18 present Tax and Policy Dialogues.
Hello and welcome to KPMG and CNBC-TV18 present Tax and Policy Dialogues, insights on developments that impact you. I'm your host Gautam Srinivasan, and today we are diving into a crucial global shift that's redefining trade relationships, the US's recalibration of tariffs under the lens of reciprocity. So what does this mean for Indian businesses? Is this a move towards economic nationalism or a strategic call to reorder global value chains? From pharma to infrastructure, from exports to import dependencies, the ripple effects are real and far-reaching. So in this episode, we unpack whether India is at risk, in a position of strength, or standing at a crossroads. Joining me to take this discussion forward are Himanshu Tiwari, Partner, Trade and Customs at KPMG in India. Joining him are Nitin Kumar Parekh, Group Chief Financial Officer at Zydus Life Sciences Limited. With him is Amit Agarwal, Group Chief Financial Officer at Raymond Limited. And finally, we have with us Vimal Kejriwal, MD and CEO at KEC International Limited. Gentlemen, great to have you on board, and this topic is hot, so I'm looking forward to cooling things down with some perspectives and insights from all of you. Himanshu, let's start with you, because when this news flow keeps coming about tariffs, it makes me as an average person think, what sort of recalibration is happening broadly? Because it seems to be less about classic protectionism. That's my impression, and more about re-engineering leverage in a sort of a bilateral trade framework. So for Indian exporters, does this tariff regime, the tariff news that keeps coming about, does this shift a significant reordering of the current trade privileges rather than it just being a sort of a temporary policy disruption? That's what a lot of people want to know. Is this sort of a structural change from the Bretton Woods system, which has lasted for a while, or is this just a blip in the radar? What would you think?
Thank you, Gautam, for having us here. I guess we are in exciting times. As you called out, Bretton Woods, almost like 80 years, 90 years ago, that was the system, was the framework was set up. And we think that definitely that framework is being challenged. Now, whether it will permanently unbundle it and something new will emerge, or only a fine-tuning will happen, only times will tell. But at a framework level, few things that clearly stand out, that while tariff is being spoken as a key word, but that is only an invitation to the discussion table. On the discussion table will be topics which are much more significant, and the topics of trade, economic nationalism, getting the manufacturing activity of key and strategic goods into the geographical boundaries, all of that will be the agenda for the discussion. So tariff is not the ultimate destination. It is just the invitation. That is the first point.
It's just the first thread that we are unraveling.
So
what it unravels...
Join us in the party is the tariff word.
All
Rest will start.
I will take one term that you use, economic nationalism, and get some viewpoints around that. Nitin, let me come to you, because when I look around the world, we truly are in an era where economic nationalism keeps taking the headlines. When we look at Make in India, when we look at Make America Great Again, Make Britain Great Again, those are a whole lot of slogans which come about. But the question is this sort of reciprocal tariff structure regime that we're looking at, is it setting a precedent for a sharp resurgence in economic nationalism and protectionism?
I believe that reciprocal tariff is a tit for tat strategy, and has a justification in terms of having self-sufficiency for America, all called an American first approach. While many other countries have taken such protectionist measures in the past, the sheer depth and width of this reciprocal tariff is quite unparalleled. And therefore, it certainly seems that this is a resurgence of nationalism or protectionism in the world. Look at the era, how the trade has evolved over the past. Till 19th century, the large part of revenues most countries were getting from tariffs. Then we had GATT, we had WTO, we had Tariffs, all of them favoring liberal trade, free trade. From there, now reciprocal tariff is talking about, rolling back. And this rolling back or rollover is, creating a roller coaster ride for the entire world. What the companies should be doing, I think companies should focus on research and innovation and working on 3 C's. And these 3 C's are building global capabilities, capacities, and cost competitiveness.
Bimal, let me come to you, because when we narrow the focus to just the America-India trade relationships, it's interesting that the US is drawing sharp lines between strategic trade partners and sort of transactional relationships. So the question that I have for you, taking from the point that we're moving from a free to a fair trade regime, do you see India's positioning, especially amidst this ongoing bilateral FTA talks that we hear about, as whether it's insulated, whether it's opportunistic, or vulnerable under this tariff doctrine? Because politically there might be sync, but trade is a whole different animal. So from the perspective of whether this works from an opportunity perspective, whether we are vulnerable or whether we are insulated, where are we currently?
If you ask me, where are we insulated? There are certain product categories which are, where we are competing only with China. And whether China is with 245% or whatever is the number of duty which keeps on changing. If I am making those products, then I'm reasonably insulated from whatever happens. There are products where there are only 2 countries. Okay. Opportunistic would be very clearly, maybe Amit can talk more, but if you look at some of those area countries and all that, where the tariffs are significantly higher than us, Bangladesh, Vietnam, and all that.
Textiles is a natural.
There are other products also. So there is an opportunity very clearly also in that. If you ask me vulnerable, we are 100% vulnerable with the trade deficit which we have, especially with US. Okay, very clearly what we are seeing on whether it is India, whether it is China, I think what US is targeting is how to reduce the trade deficit. I think that's what they are saying, that you can't take the balance of payment from me and invest in my treasury bonds and then play around with me. I think that's the basic piece. As far as BTAs and all are concerned, my view is that we should first close with US. Okay, and then see what are the contours and all that, then use that with others. Because if you start doing it with others first, and if US says, oh, you have done something better than me with them, then all this will also come into the US part of it. And one clear element which we should see is with all these tariffs, the country of origin issue is coming up everywhere. So how do you use BTAs to strengthen your supply chain and see that, no, I don't know, in my industry, I know that, you give us certificates and nothing in this has come from a particular country. Now, so how do you use BTAs to ensure that instead of importing from, let's say, China, can I import it from Thailand or can I import it from someone else? Those become very critical, saying how do you configure your supply chain in a manner that you can meet all the tariff requirements and it is still favorable to you. And I will give you a simple example. Like we have a factory in Mexico. We supply to US, it goes under USMCA, the act, and then you don't pay any duty on that. But for that, the US steel content, the steel should have been melted in US. Okay. Now, many times I used to supply from India to them. Now, that will completely change. So, a lot of things like this will change on your supply chain, on your back end also, to meet the new tariff and the country of origin requirements.
That's an interesting perspective. As you said, we are at the same point in time vulnerable, opportunistic, and of course, we can take advantage of it as well. And I wonder, especially for conglomerates, as you mentioned, you have a factory in Mexico which supplies to the US, you have a factory in India which supplies to the US and another nation. Now, how do you reconcile? We'll see how things progress as clarity emerges. Meanwhile, let me come to you, Amit, for your thoughts, because we are inching towards plurilateralism and supply chain realignment. And the question is, could the US reciprocal tariff regime catalyze India's ascent as a sort of a friend-shoring hub, because we still have a good relationship with the Americans? So do you think that's going to hold, or do the rules of origin and compliance still hold us back?
Actually, you see, it is very interesting and friend-shoring. And as you said, the US and India still has a better relationship. And what I see in this whole process is India will always sit in a slightly better position vis-a-vis China. And that gives us, India, a good opportunity. Second thing, manufacturing has not been a big base for us for exports. And I think this is one opportunity which India gets in terms of opening up big. And today the business houses have also capability to invest. There is a capital, there is a scale which we can build, and what are the efficiencies we can build. So that is going to help us, the Indian companies, to export well. Second thing, as he talked about the origin, I think the challenge what many people will face, and especially in my industry, in apparel industry, you know, over the last 5 years, Vietnam deficit has changed from 20 to 100 billion. And the reason being very simple: Chinese put their fabrics into Vietnam, get it converted to apparel. However, with this reciprocal, I think they will also see what is the value add. And I think that component is going to be a very big determinant of saying whether the goods are produced out of Vietnam with this China's component of 70-80%, and then they put the tariff on that basis. Or it is India who has the capability to produce the entire thing right from the fabric, converting into apparel. And there are many such products in India, scale, which can produce and export.
Before we take a break, a quick question on, are Indian companies sort of taking a wait and watch approach when it comes to bilateral agreements, or are the wheels already turning? A quick point of view from you, Himanshu?
Sure. I think it is a wait and watch, but with a difference. At the core, there is simulations and scenarios being built up, and the companies are preparing for what used to be a unified global world to a tripolar world, with US as the one pole, China being the second pole, and the global south being the third pole.
All right, I have 10-15 seconds before I go to break. So quick dipstick poll from all the industry leaders. Wait and watch or work in progress? What do you think? What is your opinion?
So Indian companies are working on their own playbook. I think there is a go-no-go situation. They already have a scenario analysis at different points of tariff possibility, whether they should manufacture or not manufacture. And they are working, looking at their own product mix, product categories, cost programs, cost versus price relationship, volume market share game, looking at non-US countries also and working on the compliance. And I would like to quote these lines from my ghazal book. गर अकड़ के सर रखोगे थक यकीनन जाएगा, क्यों कहीं कोई समय उसको झुका कर देखिए.
वाह 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 वाह. Well, the message is ये तो बस झांकी थी, picture अभी बाकी है. We'll take a short break on that note, but stay tuned, lots more to discuss.
KPMG in India and CNBC-TV18 present Tax and Policy Dialogues. KPMG in India and CNBC-TV18 present Tax and Policy Dialogues.
Welcome back to this special presentation where we have with us a collection of industry leaders and experts all talking about tariffs and the way ahead, of course, for India. Himanshu, let's dive right back in, taking some cues from what we discussed in the first segment. While much of the discourse we have seen is on export-driven sectors, do you think that reciprocal tariffs could also prompt a rethink of India's import dependencies, especially when we look at pharma APIs, when we look at electronics, capital goods, because this is a big equation as well, right? When I look at energy, that as someone who might be in a think tank, they would say, you know what, we need to remove import dependency on energy. When we look at capital goods, we need to up our local domestic manufacturing base. Pharma APIs. What's your thought on this?
So Gautam, I would say that India has been fairly strategic and long-term thinking already is in place. You will see that the PLI, which the first PLI and the phased manufacturing program that was rolled out in 2014, and the smartphone success story is a poster boy of the success of the government policy. Lot of BIS and quality control orders being put in place so that the steel manufacturing shifts to India and all the sourcing happens in India. All the custom tariff exemptions are being lowered, and the economic survey says that more than 1/3 of the customs tariff duty rates has already moved up. So while there is so much of news and media attention on President Trump increasing the duty rate by 10%, India has been progressively doing it over past 5 years without that dramatic attention being there. So I would say that India, in a very strategic manner, without getting significant attention or creating drama around it, has been moving along these lines. I would totally agree with our colleagues on the panel that while import substitution is significantly a work in progress and lot of policy tools has already been activated, we will have to continue to work on protecting the domestic industry against dumping or the possibility of dumping either in our jurisdiction or in the jurisdiction where we want to be present and we want to sell our goods.
Absolutely. And it's great that the conversation is now becoming a bit more robust, because the earlier school of thinking, as you said, every nation would want to improve itself domestically, whether it comes to manufacturing or other sectors. But from an impetus perspective, if we are entering a world where bilateral free trade agreements are going to be the norm and issues such as dumping are taken more seriously. When I look at steel, look at the issues which had caused when cheap Chinese steel used to be dumped. The fact that we are having a more richer conversation on that note means that we hopefully start on the right foot. हमें ना दवा ना दुआ की जरूरत है, हमें action की जरूरत है, which we have already started. All right,
दवा
Nitin,
की जरूरत सबको होती है.
दवा की जरूरत होती है, especially when it comes to your business. So let me come to you, Nitin, because दवा की जरूरत तो है, but दवा बनने में, the making of a medicine also takes a whole lot of factors.
Absolutely.
When I look at the API base, it's still a lot of dependencies there in China.
Yeah.
So when this China plus one opportunity now emerges, what's your thought? Are we in a position to take advantages from a pharma perspective? Can we diversify our API base from China? Where do you think things stand in the India-China relationship, especially for the pharma sector? Because I believe issue starts from the starting material itself. What would you say?
Yeah, so short term, I think the benefit of this tariff part would be in terms of getting market share for pharmaceutical products. Given our cost leadership, given steep tariff on other countries, including EU for that matter, and given our cost advantage, we will be able to get good market share. But API is going to be long-term gain, and there are reasons for that, because it's not only question of manufacturing API. For API, you also need intermediates, key starting materials. For that, again, we are heavily dependent on China. And China has certain distinct advantages, and that is why it is going to be long-term gain, because China is able to price their APIs almost about 30-40% lower than most Western countries, okay, because of the scale that they have. In India, when we go for API manufacturing, we have a PLI scheme where the government has identified certain critical APIs, KSMs, intermediates, etc. But it's limited to certain items, not for the whole range of APIs, right? And manufacturing APIs and KSMs also need technological processes and skilled labor. So there is some kind of gap which, in terms of skilling, reskilling, we'll have to do. And to be globally competitive, we need two things: global scale as well as global competitiveness, and both are interrelated. So it's going to be time, maybe 5 years to 10 years time, for us to make a significant headway in terms of API manufacturing.
All right. Amit, let me come to you, because when I look at it from a textiles perspective, we there are in a better position because Vietnam, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh all higher tariffs. But what's your outlook on this sector? Is it a short-term gift with long-term problems, or is it a long-term gift that your sector has?
Actually, we see that it is an opportunity which is going to be a long-term. Because some of these brands don't want to change very quickly and rapidly, that they give you order for this year and the next year they want to go. Second, all these countries which you mentioned, be Vietnam, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, do not have the fabric manufacturing. They all are dependent on China. So therefore, they have to continue to import from China. Here for India, the first advantage is start exporting fabric to these countries, get them converted. Second thing is, all the players overseas will start saying that you guys have an integrated capability of fabric garmenting. So India will stand a very strong chance. Second thing, India is also becoming, in terms of the cost structure, if I look at Vietnam and us cost structure, we are at least 40% cheaper compared to Vietnam. Maybe their productivity is slightly higher, but we will get there. because we are building the scale. So that is one advantage. And I think actually if you see from 2020 onwards, all of us have seen in the textile garmenting industry that everybody expanded capacity. And what has been our share, if I take the import into US for the garments, we are not even 5%. So China sits at 32%. So there's a large gap which you need to cover. So I think we will stand in a very, very good spot. And also a lot of innovation will come. Because of that, you will also get cost advantages and benefit. It will be a good growing industry.
All right, miles to go before we weave. All right. Vimal, let me come to you. And speaking of cost structure, that leads me to capex decisions, because KEC operates in cables, it operates in railways, infra, your presence is widespread, all exposed to capex cycles. So the question is, how do you see US tariff pressures influencing capex decisions in markets like, say, Latin America, Africa, or Southeast Asia, where KEC is active? You mentioned the example earlier of the factory in Mexico supplying to US, factory in India supplying to US. But when we look at the global map where you have expanded into various markets, how does that interplay work in terms of capex?
So as of today, if you look at it, we have not seen any scaling back anywhere. Okay, whether it's Middle East, which is one of our largest markets, or US. Africa has been picking up slowly. See, they have never recovered from COVID. Because all the money was still going to development projects rather than infra. But now we have slowly started seeing a lot of work happening on the infra side. Also, I think the biggest concern should be US. But US, everyone knows that the infra has been crumbling. So with whatever has happened, I think the infra spend, I'm not seeing anything happening on the infra spend in the short term. Where we are seeing an impact and where it could possibly happen is on the industrial capex side. Because with whatever discussions are happening on tariffs and all that, I know some Tesla plants, they're saying we will not implement or not install them today. For example, there was a Tesla plant coming right opposite my factory in Mexico. I think that's been put on hold. So I think on the industrial capex side, I think people will wait and watch and see what happens, what comes out of the tariff war, etc., and bilateral agreements, etc., then decide. For example, I'll give a simple example. I have factories in India, Dubai, Brazil, and Mexico producing the same product. We were trying to expand them because of our market. And we have drawn up plans, but we are waiting and watching, saying, how does the tariff come? So today, for example, Brazil has virtually no tariff. So maybe for the US market, I may expand my Brazil plant rather than the India plant. So I think these are the things which will happen on the capex cost side. But as of now, we have not seen any inclination from any of our clients or any of the countries saying they want to go slow on the capex piece of it. No.
Well, this has been just a preview. The long-term effects are still to reveal themselves, and we can only hope for the best for India as we power ahead in the next few years. Well, that brings us to the end of this edition of KPMG and CNBC-TV18 present Tax and Policy Dialogues, insights on developments that impact you. Well, as global trade recalibrates and tariff strategies evolve, it's clear that Indian businesses must stay agile, balancing risk, resilience, and readiness. Whether it's redefining supply chains, diversifying dependencies, or negotiating smarter trade partnerships, the choices we make now will shape our competitive edge in the years ahead. That's the message coming from our panel of industry and thought leaders. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a very revealing conversation, and we wish you all the best for your respective sectors and for your respective businesses as well. And thank you so much to our viewers for tuning in. Till next time, this is your host, Gautam Srinivasan, signing off. Have a great day.
KPMG in India and CNBC-TV18 present Tax and Policy Dialogues.